everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today I am going to be talking about going on submission as an already published author and what it is like to go to auction. I realized I never actually talked in depth about my experiences going on submission with my YA thriller, The Ivies, which is going to be my third book. It's my second book contract, and whether it's any different going on submission the second time. And I did end up going to auction, which was a new experience for me as an author, and one that was kind of mystifying to me and remains slightly mystifying to me, but I can share kind of what my experiences were and what I learned from the process. Overall, going on submission the second time is just like going on submission any other time before you sell. It is nerve-wracking. It is a roller coaster of emotions. We're gonna talk about my 2-week crisis, which is actually very, very common for submission. Probably the biggest difference is, well, you've gone through it before. I'd say you have a modicum of confidence because you have sold before, you've survived submission before. But I'd say the number one thing that comes up that colors your submission experience is, well, now you have sales to your name. This is assuming you are, of course, going on submission after your book has come out. Sometimes it does happen before your debut, but my experience was my first book had already been published, and so there were sales on the books. There were numbers that publishers could look up. I am a known entity. I can't debut again. So surely that factored into how I was considered on submission. I'll never know exactly how or any of the behind the scenes conversations, but I have to assume they looked at my previous works and they looked at my sales. So that said, I was going on submission with something completely different from my first two books. So my first two books were YA sci-fi romance retellings, and my new book, The Ivies, is 100% juicy commercial thriller, like contemporary high stakes thriller. So before I dive into official submission itself, one thing that does come up when you are previously published is it's pretty standard to send your book as a courtesy to your previous editor. Especially if you enjoyed working with them, it's a nice thing to send it to them, even if the understanding is that it's also going to go on wide submission. Most often you give that editor a couple weeks lead time to get a first look on it. So we did do that with my publisher. And then we officially went on wide sub 2 weeks later on September 26th. My sublist, I don't remember the exact number, but it had 13 or 14 editors on it. That's a very typical first round for my agent. She does kind of mid-sized round one. Since I was totally switching genres, my agent couldn't put too many editors on there who had seen my previous work and liked my previous work. She did her own magic figuring out who was interested in high concept thrillers, specifically who was looking for boarding school books, and a lot of the responses we got, it was like, oh, I really love boarding school books, and it's like, and so my agent sent out her pitch for the book on 9/26, and within 24 to 48 hours, all but I believe one of them had requested the book, and then I waited. So now I kind of talk about the combination of my confidence and my emotions. Just talk about the roller coaster of feelings on sub. So we all kind of have that unicorn dream in our hearts of like, oh, what if I'm the person who gets an offer at the end of the weekend, like 24 to 48 hours, and someone wants to buy my book. We all hope that that is us. But in particular, I had a lot of emotions connected to this book and connected to this book selling that I think made me like an extra mess. Because I did write this book, I finished this book as my mother was dying from cancer, and I revised it after she had died. And then I went on sub. So imagine, I was pretty fresh off of this horrible thing that had happened to me, and I go on sub in the fall while carrying this mess of emotions with me. So I think I was in a particularly weird place. And so over the next 2 weeks, we heard absolutely nothing. And I will confess, I started to kind of spiral emotionally, though I kept most of the worst of it for my agent because I try to make her think I'm a mature, normal adult whenever possible. But my friends definitely heard a lot of it, because basically on submission, whether it's your first time or your fourth time, etc., you make up imaginary benchmarks in your head. And when you pass those benchmarks, those time benchmarks, you start to convince yourself that it's all over and everything is garbage and nobody loves you and you will never sell a book again. This happens in querying too. I mean, we all come up with these imaginary benchmarks, especially based on stories we've heard. So it's like, it's Monday and no one read my book over the weekend. I'm not going to be the unicorn who sells in 48 to 72 hours. It's been a week and you haven't heard anything, not even a rejection. No one's even reading your book. No one wants to read this. You're just going to sit on their TBR forever and ever. So I hit week 2. I actually survived week 1 okay, but I hit week 2, like literally 2 weeks. I think my meltdown was on a Thursday or a Friday, and it had been 2 weeks since I went out. And I distinctly remember the chat conversation I had with a particular friend of mine, a safe space, a safe person, and I just like let all my feelings out, where I was just like, you know, feeling sorry for myself. And I was like, if it's been 2 weeks and we haven't even heard interest from someone, something is wrong. The book isn't as good as I thought it was. The concept is strong, but something's wrong with the book. Something is broken. I clearly didn't pull this off. And part of what contributed to that, so it's important to know this, and this is something that you have to deal with the more author friends you have, because you have the context of other people's experience on submission. And my context was I had a friend who also writes thrillers, who in the same period of time-ish, a little bit before me, was in the sub-trenches around the same time and was going to second reads within 48 to 72 hours. Second reads is when the first editor reads your book and they love it so much that they want a second person at the publisher to read it to see if they agree, and then they can take it further on to acquisitions. And so I hadn't even heard that I was going to second reads, because I wasn't necessarily expecting an offer in 72 hours, but I was hoping that some editors would be so excited they'd read it over the first weekend and I would go to second reads. And when that didn't happen, and it's 2 weeks, I was just despairing and feeling sorry for myself. And then promptly on Monday morning, I felt like a giant asshole, because on Monday morning, so at this point I had been on submission for 2.5 weeks, I heard from my agent that an editor was interested. I really legitimately felt like a jerk, but I was very happy that I'd only expressed my feelings to a few people. So it was Monday, October 14th, and my agent said an editor is interested and they want to schedule a phone call with you because they love the book, but they have some edit ideas in mind and they want to talk to you before they take it further to potentially offer, to make sure that you're open to their editorial changes. Now, the hardest part was that I had to wait 4 whole days for the phone call. So on Monday I was told they want to talk to on the phone, and we couldn't schedule our call until Thursday. So I was just like, I was like a tight string that whole week, and I was like, and I was just so excited, but also so nervous, because it ended up that the editor was on the call, but so was her boss. So the head of the publisher was on the call too. And I got on the phone call and realized the big boss at this publisher read my book too. They both really liked it. We had like an hour-long phone call where they asked me about my inspiration for the story, and we talked about it, and they did run the editorial feedback by me, the ideas that the editor had in mind to change. And they were some moderately big changes, nothing earth-shatteringly crazy, but a lot of authors are quite attached to their endings, for example, and they wanted to know, most importantly, was I willing to rewrite the ending? That was the major edit. And honestly, we talked it through and I thought about it, and it wasn't the first time that I had heard that feedback. And I thought, you know, I think it's a really interesting question. They were wanting to explore a specific question of, well, what if it happened this way? And I was intrigued by it. And most importantly, I wasn't so patently against it. It didn't rub against kind of everything the book was. It wasn't a linchpin kind of thing. So I went, yeah, I would totally rewrite my ending. I liked their editorial feedback. The editor definitely got my book, which is very, very important. It's like they get it, but then they also want to work on something. And that's the important thing. I have had experiences where an editor just really doesn't get the book and the thing they want to change is an essential thing, and it's kind of a matter of telling the difference. But the important thing is, I got off the call, I called my agent and I said, the call went really, really well. I really like this editor. They had interesting editorial feedback that's making me think, and I'm into this. So my agent did her follow-ups, confirming with them that I was all in, and then she nudged everyone else who had my manuscript. So that was a Thursday. Monday and Tuesday, we got 2 passes from people who said, we're so happy that the manuscript has interest. This isn't quite right for us. Okay. And at this point, my agent and I are waiting because the first publisher who I talked to is going to make an offer. Like, that was clear. They just wanted to make sure that I was okay with the editorial changes before they made an offer. So it became another waiting game. So then on October 23rd, which I believe was a Wednesday, we got the offer. So now everything becomes real. So amazing, we have an offer. My agent follows up with everyone who still has the book. The previous nudge was there's interest and a phone call is happening to kind of, I guess that's like lighting the pilot light. But now she turns up the heat. There's a real offer on the table, and she asks everyone to get back to her by a week in the future, indicating whether or not they also plan to offer. Because if they plan to offer, we're going to do an auction. And more or less that's what happened. Over the next week, responses trickled in, some people bowing out, but a few people expressing serious interest. So I did end up having 2 more editor calls over that next week. So first was publisher number 2, as I will call them. So offer 1 is pub 1, this now pub 2. First, they let us know that they really, really loved it and they were taking it to acquisitions. Then we found out they got the thumbs up, green light from acquisitions. So then we jumped on a phone call. Just like the first one, it was a really great conversation. And this is when I realized, oh, this is going to be really hard. So my previous submission, I ended up getting a preempt from my publisher. I never had to choose between publishers. I never spoke to editors on the phone. This is the first time I was having editor phone calls, and there's this aspect of like, you get to choose. And I started getting cold sweats at this point because I had now had 2 really good phone calls with 2 really good publishers. And generally, I'm just going to warn you. So this unfolded over a period of weeks. It wasn't one of those situations where my auction happened in 48 hours and bam, it was done. Everything from the point of interest to actually closing the auction was about 3 weeks. And from the offer, it was the first offer, it was 2 weeks. And I was a mess of emotions. I oscillated so much, I will tell you, between the editors. I spoke to a 3rd editor, pub number 3, on the Monday. It was also a really good call with someone. It was just like so cool to hear that they really enjoyed Thriller, but then I didn't clear acquisitions with that editor's publisher. So that was a phone call that happened before acquisitions, which was all about the timing. Because once the second publisher said, we cleared acquisitions, it's going to be an offer, my agent set up an auction and she set a date for the auction. And so talking to editor number 3, it was a timing thing that it just like the way their acquisitions meeting worked, she needed to talk to me before acquisitions. So I did end up finding out the morning of my auction, I didn't clear acquisitions at that publisher. And I will be honest, I wasn't that mad about it because I have not cleared acquisitions at that publisher before, so I almost expected it in a weird way. But honestly, at that point, it's a champagne problem because I already had 2 publishers who definitely wanted to buy it. So there was also a 4th publisher in the mix at the end, publisher number 4. And this one, like, there are all sorts of like weird timing and mini tragedies that go on in publishing. And I learned something new every time. Like, I was like, the editor wanted to buy the book. The main team okayed buying the book, but the publisher, like the head person who ultimately had the say in actually making an offer, terms, etc., was on vacation and literally didn't come back to the office in time for the editor to get permission and terms for participating in the auction. So basically the morning of the auction, which was a Thursday, I found out that pubs 3 and 4 were not able to participate. So it ended up being publisher number 1 and publisher number 2 participating in an auction. And this is where I am the wide-eyed author who asked my agent a million questions. Like, I've observed other friends going through auctions, and I think what I find the most fascinating, and for you too, as much as I'm telling you what this experience was like, apparently auctions can be different. It's about how the agent sets up the auction. And this is where I learned all sorts of things. Like, I asked my agent, I was like, well, if it's only 2 publishers, is it an auction? And she's like, yes, because I set up an auction, and so an auction is going to happen even though it's only 2. There are some cases where where two publishers wanting a book is an auction, and there's some cases where two publishers wanting a book isn't an auction. I mean, this is why we have literary agents, because they know all this stuff and they do it for us. There are also different ways to set up the parameters of your auction. And my agent and I had already had a lot of conversations about what I actually wanted with this book, because now we have champagne problems because we know that someone wants to buy it. And so I got to really have those conversations with my agent. And, you know, we did jump on the phone, but also we'd had many conversations through the course of writing this book and strategizing and thinking about my career. I knew what was most important to me, and it wasn't money. I wasn't interested in getting a ton of money for this book and going necessarily to the big baller who threw the most money at it. For me, what was most important, because, you know, it's my third book, it's a completely new genre, and I really care about this book. I'm very emotionally attached to this book, and I really wanted to have its best shot at kind of breaking out. It was really important to me that whoever I landed with had all the support in-house, that, you know, publicity was really excited, marketing, the sales team, and I would have a really good shot at the push that I desperately wanted. I have all sorts of author dreams, and I made a whole video on it, but things came up, it would be my dream if this book was in Target. So I was really thinking about which publisher was going to best position the book, essentially. And so my agent structured the auction so it wasn't highest bidder gets the book. She structured it so it was best offers in rounds, and then at the very end, I could evaluate and weigh the two offers and pick the one I liked the best. So how the auction actually worked: at the start of the auction on Thursday morning, publisher number 2 sent my agent their opening offer as a counter to publisher number 1's offer. Then my agent took their offer, went back to publisher number 1 and said, do you want to match it? Raise it? Can you improve your terms? And then they went back and forth in rounds from there. And so it always became a matter of, did the other publisher want to up the bid? Did they want to sweeten the pot? And I'll talk about kind of all of those different things that flew back and forth. We ended up going back and forth. It was either 4 or 5 rounds. I kind of lost track because my agent was handling everything, and she was texting me updates and sending me things via email. It was so nerve-wracking. I was at work and I was just looking at my phone and every time something new would come in, I'd be like, oh my gosh. And that's the thing. So they'd throw in different things in different rounds. So some of the things that were offered, just for context, they each offered bonuses if I hit the New York Times list. This is actually pretty common in a lot of offers. They'll offer New York Times bestseller bonuses, and then, most people don't hit them. But if you do, you get some extra cash in your pocket. One would have a royalty escalator, and she'd go back to the other one. A royalty escalator is when it's you get 10% of hardcover up to 25,000 copies, and then you get 12.5%. Well, part of the negotiating back and forth was, well, can you bring that escalator down? Can you increase the royalty over here on this? And those are the kind of things that my agent was going back and forth with the two of them. So in one round, publisher number 1 would match the royalty escalator from publisher number 2. Other things that kind of went back and forth in the auction, negotiating points, was the payout structure. Publisher number 1 wanted 4 payments, and publisher number 3 was willing to do 3. And so publisher number 1, they changed that they would do 3. So these are all the kind of nitty-gritty things that go into it. And then importantly, because my agent let them know that marketing was a consideration for me, both of them sent me sample marketing plans. Now, here's the thing about publishing. A marketing plan means nothing and is not real until it's 3 to 6 months out from publication and the things on the marketing plan actually start happening. Until they actually execute the things they tell you they're going to do for your book, they're not real. For me, it wasn't so much about a guarantee of what they were going to do, but I wanted a sense of scope and capability. I wanted to know what publicity and marketing and sales tactics they had in mind for my book specifically, and what kind of their approach would be for promoting the book. At that point, I'd had experience in having books come out and marketing at publishers for 1.5 books. We were a couple months out from release of my second book. So I just basically had an idea of what I like versus what I don't like, and what I think moves the needle versus what I don't feel moves the needle. And so I was able to take into consideration the different marketing kind of ideas and capabilities of the different publishers. Finally, final round, one of the publishers was like, this is as high as we go. And so my agent went back to the other one and said, you can match it or you can beat it, and then that's final offers. I'll take everything to Alexa and she will look at everything. And this is where I love my agent. She made an amazing comparative spreadsheet for me and for her, and she screenshotted it and she sent it to me so that we were able to literally compare apples to oranges, look at the two side by side, term for term, and kind of discuss things. And we did jump on the phone, and this is where I really relied on my agent's expertise, because I wanted to know what she thought. What were her feelings about the different publishers? What were her feelings about what they were offering versus what they weren't? And she offered some honestly helpful insights that helped me make my decision, especially because, as I mentioned, I was very emotional about this. And this happens with queries too. If you end up having multiple agent offers, it is a double-edged sword because you have these really excellent conversations. Like, I was facing a decision where I had 2 amazing phone calls with 2 editors. And actually, I forgot to mention, editor at pub number 1, the first call was with her and the publisher, and they were mostly asking me about my inspiration for the book. And I actually asked for another phone call, which you are always able to do. Like, don't be afraid to say to your agent, hey, could I talk to that editor again? And I asked to talk to that editor again one-on-one because I wanted to know more about her, because I realized with editor number 2, I got a lot of information about her editorial style and kind of her vision for her list, her background in publishing and how she came to publishing. And I wanted to know more about the editor from pub number 1, honestly, so that I could make a more informed decision on a more even playing field where I had similar amounts of information on both of them. It was a really good phone call because I was able to ask her about kind of what brought her to publishing, as well as her specific editorial style and what I might be able to expect. So I had all this information going into the decision, but it was very emotional because I liked them both. And I had this feeling of like, I'm going to disappoint someone no matter what I do. And like, we had a really good conversation. What am I supposed to do? And my agent was there to keep me grounded and guide me and remind me, well, decision was mine and she wasn't going to push me in either direction, but she also reminded me of some of the business considerations and that it was win-win, essentially, that I'd had 2 really good phone calls with 2 really good editors, and I had to like let someone down, and I just had to like take a deep breath and make a decision that kind of weighed a lot of different factors, both the personal and the professional. Luckily, I had the night to think on it. She let them know that she'd tell them my decision the next day, and I used that time to consider what my agent had said. I used that time, I messaged all my friends to kind of recap them and get their opinion. I also looked up books on both lists for both publishers that were similar to mine. I looked at their covers, I looked at the marketing push that they got, and I really thought long and hard, and I did soul searching. And honestly, a big thing that I had to do soul searching on that has led me to give a very certain kind of advice. I was also looking at an editor who wanted me to do a major rewrite to the end of the book versus an editor who didn't want a major rewrite at the end of the book. I actually specifically asked, are you okay with the ending? They were. We were going to do other kinds of edits, but that wasn't an edit I needed to do. And I basically challenged myself. I asked myself, am I afraid of the harder edit? And if so, why? And I challenged myself to really think about how I would implement those changes, why those changes scared me. I was weighing my own sense of basically wanting to feel like I'd nailed it and maybe not have to do quite as much editing. But the publisher who wanted more edits, my gut was telling me that they were the way to go. I liked their deal terms. I really liked their marketing plan. But long story short, I went with Crown, and that is who I'm being published by. And so we let them know the next day. My agent did some more negotiation back and forth to finalize the offer. And then we were able to announce about 2 weeks later. And here we are. Now, something to bear in mind, announcement timelines do vary publisher to publisher. It happens that the one that I went to let me announce pretty quickly, but other publishers you might not be able to announce until the contract is done. So it's not like normal to announce 2 weeks later, though I have now had that situation 2 books in a row, but it really depends on publisher and kind of their contract and whatnot. And just as a reflection, I obviously haven't gotten to the marketing part yet, and like, I guess I'm like nervous and buzzing, but I know I've teased you before and I'm sorry to do it again, but when I saw my cover, finally, I knew I'd made the right decision because I saw the cover and I was like, they really care about this book. I can't wait for you to see it. I just had this like feeling in me of like, I made the right choice. And let me tell you, editorially, my editor is amazing. I learned so much doing edits with her, and it sounds cheesy, but it's like genuinely true. I think I am a better writer having gone through the process with her, and there were things that she suggested and pushed me on in dev edits that have made the book. It needed those edits, and I am so glad I faced that challenge in the face. I am so glad that I didn't give into fear, because I love the book as it is now. The new ending is a burn burner. I love it. I think it's going to be controversial. I think some people aren't going to like it, but I am so glad that I did it. And another one of her major edit points, which had to do with my main character, it had a huge impact on the arcs and the pacing and Act 2, and I genuinely think it made the book. Every person who has read that version after my editor worked with me on it has had the reader reaction that I was going for when I wrote the book. So I'm just so happy that everything ended up the way it did. And what's so funny is hindsight. So, you know, when I was like freaking out that it had been 2 weeks and I hadn't heard from anyone, I had gone to second reads in that 2-week period. They just didn't tell my agent. So what I'm cautioning you is have your feelings, but no, there's often stuff going on behind the scenes, things that are happening, and the publisher won't necessarily always tell you that that stuff is going on. And I know it's hard, and you're gonna set those imaginary benchmarks anyway, and you're gonna spiral like I spiraled. But like, it's like you go through it, you go, oh, I'm kind of a ninny. The emotions feel so real when you're in them, and then in hindsight, you're like, so that's it. That is my second submission story, going on submission and selling the Ivies, which is my third book coming out from Crown, and what it is like to go to auction, at least what it was like for me. It was exciting, and it was really hard being the one to ultimately make the decision. So I guess in a sense I understand it when there's an auction and it goes to the highest bidder, because I guess it removes that pressure. But I ultimately do like that the ball was in my court to make a hard decision, but it was my decision. And if you can't tell, I adore my agent. Like, she made the whole process better. Like, she kept me up to date every single step of the way. She let me ask a million stupid questions. She let me wibble at her. She did get a couple of my emotional torrents at her over the phone and via text, and she put up with me and alleviated my fears and talked me off ledges. And I appreciate her so much for that. So let me know down below in the comments any questions you have about submission or auctions, and I will try to answer, though of course everything is kind of colored by my personal experience, but this was my experience and it was interesting. It is the best submission experience I've had, though, because I've now been on submission 3 times. The first time I didn't sell. The second time I was on sub for 7 months, had to do a revision to sell on second round. So this one, can't complain. From start to finish, I think it was 6 weeks, but from going on submission to interest, it was 2.5. So cannot complain. Give this video a thumbs up, and I will make more behind the scenes kind of videos and story times about publishing experiences I've had. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.